Tajuddin Baba, crown of the prophet. No one could understand him or have any idea who he really was. No one knew that Taj was the crown. Several British ladies were chatting over a Friday afternoon cup of tea at a country club in Nagpur in central India, when suddenly they saw a naked man strolling across the tennis courts. Outraged by this shocking spectacle and thinking the fellow must be insane, they summoned the police who took him into custody and had him placed in a lunatic asylum. This lunatic, however, was wonderfully unique. A crowd would gather outside the walls of the asylum, awaiting his blessing. A separate entranceway was erected to the asylum just so people could see him. Why? Was he really mad, or were the people who committed him mad? Why would people seek the blessing of a madman? It was the wine which he alone possessed. Although the British considered this Muslim mad, they must have been the maniacs, for they did not recognize him. He was Tajuddin Baba, the perfect master. This Qutub, pivot of the universe, opened his wine shop in a mental asylum, and those who flocked to him during the 16 years he remained incarcerated there became intoxicated and divinely mad. If this Mohammedan was not mad, why would such a man have had himself locked up? Ordinary people cannot fathom this mystery. He had come for those who were lost in their madness for the world. The years he spent in an asylum were a phase of his inner work. This Mohammedan youth was not mad. It was the world around him which was mad. Only those who are one with God are truly sane. Tajuddin Baba, the Lord of the Mind, was a unique perfect master who established his spiritual headquarters in a mental asylum. On the morning of 27 January 1861, in the town of Kamti, outside of Nagpur, the anxious family of Mariambi received the joyful news that she had given birth to a son at 5:15 a.m. Curiously enough, the baby did not cry when it was delivered. Was the baby born dead? Some wondered. Do not dare say that. Others countered. This is Mariambi's firstborn. The baby boy remained lifeless for some hours. Finally, legend has it, the family decided to touch the baby's temple and forehead with a hot iron to make it open his eyes and cry. This was done, and only then, much to the delight of all, did the child cry loudly and open its eyes to examine its surroundings. The boy was named Tajuddin Muhammad Badruddin. Tajuddin literally means one who wears a crown, in this instance, the crown of the Prophet Muhammad. His father, Sayyid Muhammad Badruddin, was a soldier, a subedar, equivalent to a lieutenant in the British Army. Just before the birth of his son, Sayyid had been transferred to Kamti from Madras. Sayyid was proud to have a son and thanked the all-merciful Allah that the child had lived. Tragedy, however, soon befell the Badruddin household. When Tajuddin was just a year old, his father died. Mariambi did her best to raise a son who would have made her husband proud. At the age of 6, the boy entered a fine elementary school and was considered an above-average student. But 3 years later, tragedy struck again. When Tajuddin was 9 years old, his mother too passed away at a young age. The burden of raising the small boy fell to his maternal grandmother. Unique spiritual qualities were detected in Tajuddin even at an early age. The boy continued with his schooling and learned Arabic, Persian, and Urdu as well as some English. He was an avid reader, rode horses, and played the violin. Tajuddin rapidly advanced in his education until he was 18 years old, when a wonderful event changed his life. A renowned saint, Peer, named Hazrat Abdullah Shah, lived in Nagpur and was highly revered by the Mohammedan community. One day, this saint visited Tajuddin's school and, observing the young man, remarked, "Why should this boy be in school? What is the need for him to study? What is left for him to learn? This young man already possesses gnosis, divine knowledge." The saint approached Tajuddin and their eyes met. Taking a biscuit, Abdullah Shah ate half and gave the other half to Tajuddin. The saint spoke as the young man chewed the biscuit: "Eat less, sleep less, speak less, and study the Quran as if the Prophet Muhammad has his very eyes on you." No sooner had Tajuddin eaten the biscuit than the ghazal of wine began singing in his heart, and his eyes shed tears of pain. The young man disappeared from the school and for 3 days remained in a blissful state of tears that seared his soul. The saint had aroused in the young man the spiritual longing for knowledge of God, the beloved. Tajuddin changed. He was no longer an exceptional student. He now preferred solitude and lost interest in socializing with his friends. He had received an inner treasure but had no idea what it was. The young man gradually came out of this state and appeared reasonably normal. At this time, he began reading the Diwan-e Hafiz, collection of Hafiz's poems, with fervor. The words of Hafiz came alive and the following couplet impressed him profoundly: "Drink wine, set fire to the Quran and demolish Kaaba. Dwell in the temple and never hurt the heart of another." Tajuddin was drinking divine wine. He was burning the Quran and Kaaba in the flames of his heart. He had entered his own inner temple of solitude and was in a blissful state. When Tajuddin was 20, circumstances led him to encounter his beloved master. Black clouds hovered over the district and heavy rains caused terrible flooding of the Kanhan River. Recruits were sought by the army to handle the disaster. The town of Kamti suffered severe damage. Many lost their homes. In 1881, to ease the financial situation of his distressed grandmother's family, Tajuddin enlisted in the army. Although worldly demands placed him in this position, inwardly the young man was calling to God and his heart was stirred to meet him. His heart had become a wine cup of song. "Where are you? Where are you, O beloved? Come, call me to you or come yourself. I can wait no longer." The beloved is always merciful, and hearing Tajuddin's wholehearted cry, he could not remain indifferent. Tajuddin's regiment was stationed in different parts of the country. It was even sent to France for a time. On its return, the regiment was posted in Hyderabad. The young man's enlistment in the army would eventually lead him to the one he sought, as in 1884 his regiment was transferred to Sagar, which means ocean. Tajuddin was destined to go to Sagar, to turn into an ocean, while the other soldiers were being trained to fight the enemy. Tajuddin was battling within himself. For a soldier to conquer an enemy is simple in comparison to overcoming one's own limited self and gaining victory over the false ego. His was a secret war. How can one gauge the inner struggle of the young Tajuddin? He was his own soldier, trying to be courageous amidst a terrible inner battle. One by one, the inner enemies of desire were defeated, and his heart was feverish with the victory cry: "Beloved, beloved, beloved." At last, one night, when Tajuddin was on guard duty, he heard someone's voice call out to him. Startled, he looked around and then walked in the direction from which the voice had come. He went beyond the barracks and entered a thick forest. Making his own path through the woods, he found an old man seated under a tree. It was the Muslim Qutub, renowned in the district, Hazrat Daud Chishti, the beloved who had filled Tajuddin's heart with restlessness. Daud Chishti is different from Muinuddin Chishti, the 12th century perfect master of Ajmer. Without looking at Tajuddin, the old master ordered the youth to bring him a cup of tea. Walking out of the dark forest, Tajuddin went back to the barrack's kitchen where he boiled a fresh cup of tea. Finding his own pathway again through the forest, Tajuddin brought the cup of tea unspilled. After sipping a little, Daud Chisti gave the remaining portion to Tajuddin and told him to drink it. As soon as Tajuddin drank the tea, his inner restlessness merged into an ocean of bliss. Tajuddin, at that moment, attained God realization. In his godhood, the world no longer existed. It turned into zero. Everything vanished. Tajuddin lost all consciousness of his own body and the outside world. He was experiencing Anal Haq, the I am God state. He had only the consciousness of the divine I and had become God. In Sagar, at the young age of 23, Tajuddin was transfigured into Sagar, an infinite ocean. The young Tajuddin became a mazhoob, one drowned in God. The young man automatically ignored the army routine, and because he was behaving unusually, his fellow soldiers were convinced he had gone mad. But in truth, he had merged with infinite bliss, infinite power, and infinite knowledge. Every night, Tajuddin would wander through the woods to find Hazrat Chishti and sit with him for hours. Tajuddin's grandmother still cared about him and had arranged his marriage to a Muslim girl. But because of the young man's peculiar state of mind, the family of the girl broke the engagement. Shortly after his night of realization, the officials found him no longer suitable for military duty. So his grandmother traveled to Sagar and brought him back to Kamti. In Kamti, Tajuddin's grandmother was also soon convinced her grandson had gone mad, seriously disturbed by his condition. The old woman sought every type of medical treatment available, but the treatments proved to have no effect, and Tajuddin's peculiar condition did not alter. Soon afterward, his grandmother died and Tajuddin was left alone. No one knew how alone Tajuddin really was. It is virtually impossible to withdraw within oneself and be alone, severing all karmic attachments and ordinary associations. The aim of life is to be truly alone as God Himself. Tajuddin had achieved this goal despite his outward behavior. He was God conscious and oblivious of his external environment. Left alone in his grandmother's house, Tajuddin's relatives abandoned him, despising him as an incurable lunatic. For 4 years, Taj lived a tortured and anguished existence in Kamti, prey to the contempt and bad behavior of his fellow townspeople. But Tajuddin's agony did not have its source in the miseries of the world. His agony was in regaining normal consciousness. Although living in desolation, Tajuddin was in the state of mazhubiyat, and a mazhub, though drowned in the infinite existence of God, is a master of all bliss. Suffering cannot affect a mazhub because he has no human consciousness. To become a perfect master and help others, such a God-realized person must be brought down from the God state and regain normal consciousness of first the mental, and then the subtle and gross worlds. In this coming down there is nothing but suffering, and this was Tajuddin's real state. However, during these 4 years, Tajuddin appeared more raving mad. At last, pitying his nephew's condition, his maternal uncle Abdur Rahman took the young man to his home in the town of Chanda, where he was working. There too, Tajuddin was medically treated, but his condition did not appear to improve. Convinced his case was incurable, Uncle Abdur sent Taj back to Kamti and left him to his fate. Back in Kamti, Tajuddin suffered terribly both physically and mentally and became the mocked village fool. No one except Daud Chishti understood that he was suffering in order to regain his human consciousness, to come back into creation consciousness, so that the suffering of all humanity could be lessened. To escape the streets of Kamti, Tajuddin spent most of his time wandering the surrounding hills. Each time when he re entered the city, people took a deeper notice of him and gradually became aware that he was not mad in the ordinary sense. Nevertheless, children would continually harass him. They teased him and threw stones, but Tajuddin never stopped them. He would collect the stones that struck him so they would not be thrown again. Being pelted with stones may have been instrumental in helping Tajuddin regain normal human consciousness. Perhaps through these mischievous children and their apparent torment, Hazrat Chishti was bringing Tajuddin back to full creation consciousness. Soon after several stoning incidents, Tajuddin started acting normal. No one knew that he had become a Sadguru. Gradually, the young perfect master became highly regarded. Once, while he was strolling through the town, he suddenly entered the house of a weaver. Tajuddin told the man forcefully, "Gather your family and valuables, and immediately leave this house." The man hesitated for a moment, but he was so impressed by the saintly personage of the intruder that he complied. Within a few moments after leaving, the house caught fire and burned to the ground. The man's family and some valuables were thus saved. On another occasion, a man sought out Tajuddin and then pleaded, "Hazrat, come, my daughter is on the verge of death." The man had sought the best possible medical advice, but the girl's condition had not improved. Tajuddin closed his eyes and after a few moments smiled, saying, "Your daughter is all right now. Go to her." The man returned home and was amazed to find his little girl sitting up in bed eating dinner. When he asked his wife how she had recovered so quickly, his wife answered, "Just a few minutes before you arrived, a wandering beggar came to the door asking for alms, and I gave him some food. He inquired about our daughter, and I showed him into her room. He was with her for only a few moments, and when he left, he said, 'Do not worry anymore, she will be all right.'" Later, when this family went to see Tajuddin, the wife declared that he was the same mendicant who had come to their house. Years passed during which Tajuddin lived on streets of Kamti, often sleeping on a bridge near the railway station. During the day or night, he would roam throughout the city. Although he appeared as a madman to strangers or as fakir to others who knew him, Tajuddin was actually perfected and functioning as a kutub at that time. Because of the constant demand for miracles and in order to fulfill his spiritual work, one day he declared, "Tomorrow I shall enter the lunatic asylum." Thus, on 26 August 1892, the incident occurred that caused Tajuddin to be incarcerated by the British authorities in the mental asylum the next day. There was an uproar of protest among the local people, especially the Mohammedans. But because one of the British women at the club had been so disturbed by the sight of Tajuddin's nakedness, her husband used his influence to force the authorities to imprison the Muslim. Tajuddin's trial received considerable attention, and during this time the judge became drawn to him. Although Tajuddin was dressed in poor attire, the judge kept seeing him dressed like a king. The judge became distressed by the court proceedings. Despite the hesitation of the judge, however, the British authorities compelled him to sentence Tajuddin to the asylum for the rest of his life. Tajuddin was 31 years old when he was taken in chains to the asylum a few miles outside of Nagpur. Today, this place is a public mental hospital. But then it served as a prison for lunatics, a madhouse where those inside were locked up for life and the keys were thrown away. There was virtually no medical treatment for the inmates, and their condition was pitiable. Dressed in a long green gown, Tajuddin would perform manual labor of breaking stones and moving dirt along with the other inmates. But when those in charge of the asylum got an inkling of his true stature, they tried to prevent him from doing such demeaning work. Tajuddin, however, refused to stop and insisted on continuing the strenuous tasks. Once Tajuddin was carrying a large ghamela, iron pan full of earth on his head. The officials of the institution were amazed to see that the ghamela was not resting on his head but was actually suspended some inches in the air. Tajuddin would move about nonchalantly while everyone saw this. From time to time, such occult incidents would occur, further strengthening the inmates' and officials' faith in his spiritual stature. The officials also noticed a remarkable change in the other inmates. Around Taj, they would become calm and happy and were deferential towards him. Having no private room, he would sleep in a large dormitory with the other inmates. One day, one of the lunatics escaped. Abdul Majid Khan, the doctor in charge of the asylum, was terribly worried. But Tajuddin approached the doctor and told him, "Do not be anxious. He will come back tomorrow." The very next day, the fellow returned. On inquiry, he said, "I went to my home, but Tajuddin Baba met me there. And after giving me 2 hard slaps across my face, he ordered me back here immediately. So I came back." After this incident, Dr. Khan developed deep faith in and devotion for Tajuddin and would invite him to his home and consult him on all matters. Thus, the man in charge of the asylum became Tajuddin's devoted disciple. Once Dr. Khan had a pressing appointment and asked Tajuddin if he could go to Bombay. Tajuddin refused to give him permission, warning the road is dangerous. But the doctor insisted. Reluctantly, Tajuddin granted him permission, but giving him a leaf from a nearby tree, said, "Carry this with you while you were traveling." The doctor left Nagpur by train and reached Bombay safely. But after the train stopped, instead of using the overpass bridge to the station, he tried to take a shortcut across the railway tracks and tripped just as a train was pulling in. Miraculously, the train screeched to a halt just a few feet from his body, and everyone at the station was astonished at his escape. Then he realized why Tajuddin had been so hesitant about allowing him to leave Nagpur. As the years went on, whenever Tajuddin wished to leave the asylum, the officials would later find that the locks on the gates had dropped off. To leave the asylum's ground was strictly forbidden. But how could they stop such a person? Tajuddin at times had an unusual lumbering gait. He appeared to shuffle rapidly along in a series of hops or skips. Children out for an evening stroll with their ayahs, nursemaids, would see him and feel frightened. But the master would beckon to them and say, "Don't be afraid, my children. I'm not really mad." After several years in the asylum, Tajuddin Baba's fame began to spread to distant corners of India, and people thronged to the asylum for his darshan. He had a special tree under which he would meet people. The spiritual atmosphere surrounding Tajuddin's presence was intoxicating. An ecstatic frenzy filled the air. The madhouse suddenly turned into a divine wine shop, where thirsting souls could drink to their heart's content. A new madness was spreading. People became mad for God and for the wonderful company of the incarcerated master. Day by day, the numbers increased, creating a problem for the asylum officials. At first, as mentioned, they erected a separate gateway leading to the tree where Tajuddin would be seated. Then the crowds became too large to manage, and the government officials of Nagpur issued entry tickets only to a fixed number. But the system failed. The fragrance of Tajuddin's wine spread throughout India, driving people mad to see him. The officials of both the city and the asylum were at a loss as to how to handle the situation. Finally, the police were directed to control the crowds. Tajuddin Baba was becoming the leading spiritual figure in the area. Among those who came for his darshan was a Muslim girl who had the same name as his mother, Mariambi. This girl came to Tajuddin with an inner thirst so great that it could drink the wine shop dry. Mariambi came for the master's real darshan with the desire to lose everything at his feet. When Mariambi approached Tajuddin, he took her arm and broke her glass bangles with a stone. This external act freed her from all external bindings and attachments in the world. The master then embraced her, and she inwardly detached herself from the world. She belonged wholly to Tajuddin Baba. I have been waiting for you, my dear, for the past 12 years, he told her, and at last you have come. It was at this moment that Mariambi became spiritually connected with Tajuddin for the rest of her life. After this profound contact, she visited Tajuddin daily in the asylum. Later, when he was freed, she was destined to be at his side always. In Mariambi's company, Tajuddin would appear extremely happy. He loved this girl especially. He poured the entire wine shop into her cup. She was among his chosen circle. It was under the personal instruction of Hazrat Chishti that Mariambi had gone to Tajuddin. Chishti had told her, "It is at Tajuddin's feet, not mine, that you should surrender everything." When she did, she gained everything. Once while Tajuddin was in the asylum, a woman was brought to him who was suffering intensely. It was thought from possession by a spirit. Tajuddin eyed her, then spat in her face, shouting, "Why are you so bold and insolent with fakirs?" As soon as he uttered these words, the woman swooned and fell unconscious. When she regained consciousness, there was a glow of relief on her face. The ghost had apparently been released by the master. Another day, Tajuddin was conversing with those gathered before him, when he suddenly turned to a visitor and asked, "What are you doing here? Your wife is dead." The man's wife was visiting relatives, but the man raced home and was handed a telegram informing him of his wife's untimely demise. A Hindu king named Raja Raghuji Rao Bhosle became devoted to Tajuddin. At the slightest hint, Bhosle was ready to dedicate everything he owned to Tajuddin. Although he was a member of the local royalty, he would often come to the asylum for Tajuddin's advice and blessing. One day, when the crowds at the asylum were unusually large, the master hinted to the Raja that his work in the asylum was finished and he wished to change seats. Bhosle became determined to have Tajuddin freed at any cost. Raja Bhosle went to the authorities and begged them to free Tajuddin. At first, the officials adamantly refused. The city was prospering from the revenue of so many visitors. Tajuddin Baba had become Nagpur's greatest tourist attraction. In September 1908, after posting a sizable bond of Rs 2,000, Raja Bhosle brought Tajuddin to live at his palace, Shakkardara, in the heart of the city. The Raja gave Tajuddin his own private bungalow called Lal Koti, the Red House. A few hundred yards from the palace, Tajuddin was then 47 years old. After more than 16 years in the mental asylum, Tajuddin was now residing comfortably in the palace of a king. But a fakir is after all always a fakir. One without any worldly possessions except the barest necessities. Tajuddin's only real need was to look after the welfare of others. Raja Bhosle devoted one room of his palace as a prayer room where he would perform his daily worship ceremonies. But when Tajuddin first moved into the Raja's compound, he would go to that room and defecate and urinate 3 times a day in front of the stone Hindu idol to which the Raja prayed. This supposedly sacred room had become the master's toilet. But the Raja's faith in Tajuddin's perfection was so deep that he humbly cleaned it himself without taking it as an insult to his religious practices. One purpose of Tajuddin's dishonoring Raja Bhosle's idols in this way may have been to prevent or mitigate any effect of tantric practices of Bhosle performed in that room from influencing Bhosle in a spiritually harmful way. After staying for several months at Lal Koti, Tajuddin moved his headquarters to Waki, a suburb about 11 miles outside of Nagpur. There he lived at the home of a Hindu disciple named Kashinath Rao Patel, who had a large estate. The property was suitable for Tajuddin's purposes because many gathered there daily for the master's darshan. Soon a small township sprung up, which Tajuddin referred to as Chota Little Nagpur. At Chota Nagpur, Tajuddin rearranged the estate's land into certain sections for his activities. A specific piece that surrounded his abode was kept vacant, which he named Waki Sharif, meaning the noble town. The land was divided into 5 main sections. Toward the west, a quarter of a mile away, Tajuddin had his dispensary, but it consisted of no medical facilities or doctors. It was a solitary mango tree under which the sick and deceased were told by Tajuddin to stay. By remaining underneath the tree, Tajuddin's patients would be cured automatically. The spiritual physician's nazar, gaze alone would heal them. Near the mango dispensary, Tajuddin pointed to a spot and named it Madarsa, school. Students would come seeking Tajuddin's help to pass their examinations, and he would oblige them by instructing them simply to sit in his madarsa. Inevitably, all the boys and girls who came passed their examinations. Another barren plot was called the court. Those who suffered financially or who faced a lawsuit or court case were sent to Tajuddin's court. Inevitably, they too found relief. Another place near the master's seat was called his mosque. Those who came only for spiritual purposes and who thirsted for the sight of God were sent there. Toward the north was an open field which Tajuddin named the parade ground. Here the master would send people to do physical exercises which had a spiritual significance. By exercising or marching back and forth, the master was preparing his followers to fight the battle with their egos or lower selves. Waki Sharif became the fairgrounds for a daily spiritual carnival. Every kind of disease or mundane problem was treated by the wine dripping from Tajuddin's loving gaze. His nazar was their solace and remedy, and no one left empty-handed or empty-hearted. One day at Waki Sharif, while it was raining heavily, Tajuddin, followed by a large crowd, was observed pacing back and forth in the downpour. At one point, he left the grounds and headed towards the road. Along the road, he happened to spot a dog that had been lying dead for 3 days. Tajuddin approached the carcass and touching it said, "Why are you lying here, my friend? Get up and run." The dog sprang back to life and scurried away. As Tajuddin's spiritual reputation spread, his relatives gradually came to accept him as someone great. One time, his aunt made him tea. He refused to drink it and pointing to his left, told her, "Take this tea to a fox lying dead in that field." The woman did as instructed. When she poured a little of the tea down the dead animal's throat, the fox shook, stood up and ran away. The miracle that caused the greatest sensation in Nagpur concerned a professional singer named Surji. She was famous for her exquisitely sweet voice and would often entertain Tajuddin. It is said that she became seriously ill and despite all possible treatment expired. Hearing the news, Raja Bhosle informed Tajuddin that Surji had died. Tajuddin became irritated and said angrily, "You are lying. She is alive. If she were to die, who would come to sing before me? Go tell her relatives not to disturb her body." The Raja returned to the house where the woman's body was being prepared for cremation and delivered Tajuddin's message. Having faith in the master's words, the relatives postponed the ceremony, and as Tajuddin had indicated, at 3 a.m. the next morning, the woman opened her eyes. "Tajuddin Baba can raise the dead," was the astonishing report that spread throughout the city and beyond. One day, during 1915, an exceptional looking individual in his early 20s, accompanied by a friend, came to see Tajuddin Baba, who was holding darshan at Waqi Sharif. As the handsome young man entered the room, Tajuddin immediately stood and their eyes met. No one in the crowd knew the hidden message their glances conveyed. Tajuddin approached the young man in his peculiar shuffling gait. A devotee had given the master a few flowers, and these Taj presented to the young man. Then Taj rubbed the young man's head affectionately. The stranger and his companion bowed to the Sadguru and left. Some moments before the striking young man had arrived, Tajuddin had lost his temper and had angrily abused all those in his presence. But upon seeing the young man, his mood changed suddenly to a pleasing manner. The fiery mood of the Qutub was altered completely upon this young man's arrival, as if the youth had brought the master some joyous news. This individual was no stranger to Tajuddin Baba. However, he was the same Zoroastrian kissed by Baba Jan and whom Narayan Maharaj had greeted royally. The young man indeed brought good news to Tajuddin that day. News that he was preparing to accept the spiritual charge from the Taj, assuming the crown of creation. Later, this youth was referred to by Tajuddin as the heavenly rose. Age was watching and knew now that this young man was the awakener. Around 1920, Tajuddin returned to Shakardara, Raja Bhosle's bungalow in Nagpur. Though he would frequently return to Waqi Sharif, he would roam in the Raja's Tonga on excursions to the outskirts of the city. Raja Bhosle did everything possible in serving Tajuddin, trying his utmost to please his master always. Tajuddin Baba enjoyed qawwalis, Persian and Urdu devotional songs to God. On one occasion, at the Raja's palace, a famous singer from Delhi named Janki came to Nagpur and wished to sing for the saint. The distinguished lady was brought to the palace, but immediately upon seeing her, Tajuddin shouted, "Take that bitch away. She thinks she can charm me like other worldly people with the sweetness of her voice. Get her out of my sight." The woman was shocked, and Raja Bhosle had her promptly removed. Tajuddin was aflame. He ordered his tonga to be brought, then left for the riverside. It was raining heavily, and the ground had turned to mud. Oblivious to the damp conditions, Tajuddin alighted and walked to the river's edge. There he sat contentedly by the flowing water. After a few minutes, he told his disciples, "Tell that singer from Delhi that if she is willing, she can come here and sing for me." Janki was informed accordingly, and she unhesitatingly complied. Grateful at his unexpected opportunity, she had despaired was lost. She was taken in a tonga to the river, where in spite of her beautiful silk sari, she waded through the mud and sat on a patch of wet ground near the Qutub. She sang for almost 3 hours in the splendor of the moonlight. Tajuddin then blessed her and sent her away. Janki knew well that the master, by going to the riverside and testing whether she would go there, was letting her understand that it was he who was honoring her by allowing her to sing in his presence. Tajuddin Baba lived his final days at Raja Bhosle's Lal Kothi. Some years before he dropped his body, He hinted about it and even specified his burial place to be at another end of Nagpur. He had selected a particular spot where he himself picked up some earth and smelled it, remarking, "The soil of Hazrat, the Great One, is sweet. If a house is built here for me, I will remain in it." His health deteriorated, and Raja Bhosle requested Tajuddin to allow people to have darshan. Even if the doctors did not permit it, Tajuddin smiled and agreed. As the news of the master's poor health spread, thousands came to the king's palace for a final farewell. The stream of visitors continued until his last moments on Monday, 17 August 1925. That day, Tajuddin lifted his hand in blessing to all and looked lovingly at those gathered. Then quietly, he lay down on the bed and closed his eyes forever on this material sphere. By the time doctors could check him, he had already dropped his body. The news of his death spread throughout the district, and his devotees felt as if their hearts had been torn out. The entire city mourned the loss of their most holy tavern keeper. Wine had poured through the streets, the asylum, and the Raja's palace for nearly 45 years. But where the master had poured wine, tears now flooded. 30 to 40,000 people of all religions, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Zoroastrian, and Christian, marched in his funeral procession from one end of the city to the other. Tears of love flowed from their eyes, and every heart was filled with grief, repentance, and gratitude. Tajuddin Baba was buried according to Islamic custom in the particular spot he himself had selected. The area was later renamed Tajabad in his honor. Raja Bhosle's Lal Kothi, now called Taj Darbar, Taj's Court, is the second main shrine in Nagpur dedicated to Tajuddin. Tajuddin Baba's body is buried there, but in reality, he is now in deep sleep. The sleep is the true awakening when the heart drinks its own tears, when one becomes conscious of one's own eternal infinity. O Tajuddin Baba, your wine still flows in our hearts. You showered roses and crowned our king.